Welcome to Lord's Day 29 of the Heidelberg Catechism. Last week we talked about communion and we called it the Lord's Supper. But I think communion is the name that we use most, at least in my church, and I think in the United Methodist Church as a whole, to call our remembrance of what Jesus did for us, that act of communion, that act of taking the bread and the juice. Recall that last week we talked about communion using the phrase Lord's Supper that has a specific meaning. This week we're going to talk about communion from the standpoint of communion, and next week we'll talk about communion from the standpoint of calling it the Eucharist. At the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, that long wall of black marble is engraved with many names of those killed in that war. People come to remember their friends and loved ones there. Writer Don Moser says that people come and they sometimes leave tokens of their remembrance. Flags, sealed letters, pieces of clothing, photos. Volunteers come along and they collect all those tokens daily and they store them at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Collection. There's a book called Offerings at the Wall that pictures many of these mementos that have been left. One man left dog tags, a headband, and a letter that reads, "To all of you here from Echo Company, 1st Marine Regiment, 1st Marine Division, I leave you my headband which contains my sweat from the war, my dog tag, and a picture of me and Mike. Another time, another place, I'll never forget you." A woman left a braid of her hair and a picture of a house with American flag hanging on the porch. Her note read, "Wayne, I think of you every day and miss you much. I love you." Written on one flag was the message, "May all who died, all of you still missing, and all of you who returned home never be forgotten. Connie." It's important to remember. Jesus told us what tokens he wants us to use to remember his death. The bread and the cup. Each has deep meaning for those who love our risen Lord. I'll be honest, I never was in the armed services, and I don't know anyone personally, firsthand, that died in the Vietnam War, or any war for that matter. So maybe it's not appropriate for me to use this example or even comment, but I will. I suspect that there's some connection that exists between all those that fought in the war and came home, those that fought in the war but lost their lives protecting us at home, those still missing, and those at home that lost someone in that war, or really in any war. There's a communion, if you will. I found the following definition of communion that I really love. It's the sharing or exchanging of intimate thoughts and feelings, especially when the exchange is on a mental or spiritual level. That wall had almost 58,000 names on it when it was dedicated in 1982, and has a little bit more than that now, I think. Of those 58,000 names, considering all those who had died, those who came back, and all their family and friends, there probably is no physical connection or communion between most of them. But there is a connection. There is a communion on another level. There is togetherness. So it is with the Lord's Supper that we call communion. There's a togetherness, even a union with those that partake of the bread and the juice or wine and Jesus. There's a togetherness, even a union between all those who have ever or will ever take communion as they remember the event that unites us all, Jesus' sacrifice, which through his grace brings forgiveness of our sins. That's why we do communion together. There's a togetherness. There's a union. We don't do it by ourselves. That's why in the United Methodist Church communion liturgy we hear these words. By your Spirit, make us one with Christ, one with each other, and one in ministry to all the world until Christ comes again and we feast at his heavenly banquet. Communion brings us together to the one place, the single place where all are welcome and all belong. That place is the Lord's table and his supper, communion. Again, you'll find the specific questions and answers for this Lord's Day simply in the post. This ends Lord's Day 29. We'll see you next week for Lord's Day 30.